The economy of Angola is one of the fastest-growing economies in the world, with reported annual average GDP growth of 11.1% for the period from 2001 to 2010. It is still recovering from the Angolan civil war that plagued the country from independence in 1975 until 2002. Despite extensive oil and gas resources, diamonds, hydroelectric potential, and rich agricultural land, Angola remains poor, and a third of the population relies on subsistence agriculture. Since 2002, when the 27-year civil war ended, the nation has worked to repair and improve ravaged infrastructure and weakened political and social institutions. High international oil prices and rising oil production have contributed to the very strong economic growth since 1998, but corruption and public sector mismanagement remain, particularly in the oil sector, which accounts for over 50% of GDP, over 90% of export revenue, and over 80% of government revenue. History. The Portuguese explorer Diogo Cao reached the Angolan coast in 1484, after which Portugal began to found trading posts and forts along the shore. Paulo Dias de Novaes founded São Paulo de Loanda in 1575. São Felipe de Benguela followed in 1587. The principal early trade was in slaves. Portuguese merchants purchased the slaves from the local Mbangala and Mabandu peoples, notable slave hunters, and sold them to the sugar plantations in Brazil. Brazilian ships were frequent visitors to Luanda and Benguela, and Angola functioned as a kind of colony of Brazil, with Brazilian Jesuits active in its religious and educational centers. The Portuguese Empire was neglected during the period of the Iberian Union, which lasted from 1580 to 1640. The Dutch, bitter enemies of their former masters in Spain, invaded many Portuguese overseas possessions. During Portugal's separatist war against Spain, the Dutch occupied Luanda as Fort Aardenburg from 1640 to 1648. They used the territory to supply their own slaves to the sugarcane plantations of northeastern Brazil, which they had also seized from Portugal. John Maurice, Prince of Nassau-Siegen, conquered the Portuguese possessions of St. George del Mina, St. Thomas, and Luanda, Angola, on the west coast of Africa. Portugal recovered the territory from 1648 to 1650. In the High Plains, the Planalto, the most important native states were Biacuté and Baylundo, the latter being noted for its production of foodstuffs and rubber. Portugal expanded into their territory, but did not control much of the interior prior to the late 19th century. The Portuguese started to develop townships, trading posts, logging camps and small processing factories. From 1764 onwards, there was a gradual change from a slave-based society to one based on production for domestic consumption and export. Following the independence of Brazil in 1822, the slave trade was formally abolished in 1836. In 1844, Angola's ports were opened to foreign shipping. By 1850, Luanda was one of the greatest and most developed Portuguese cities in the vast Portuguese Empire outside mainland Portugal, full of trading companies, exporting peanut oil, copal, timber, and cocoa. The principal exports of the post-slave economy in the 19th century were rubber, beeswax, and ivory. Maize, tobacco, dried meat and cassava flour also began to be produced locally. Prior to the First World War, exportation of coffee, palm kernels and oil, cattle, leather and hides, and saltfish joined the principal exports, with small quantities of gold and cotton also being produced. Grains, sugar, and rum were also produced for local consumption. The principal imports were foodstuffs, cotton goods, hardware, and British coal. Legislation against foreign traders was implemented in the 1890s. The territory's prosperity, however, continued to depend on plantations worked by labor, indentured, from the interior. From the 1920s to the 1960s, strong economic growth, abundant natural resources and development of infrastructure led to the arrival of even more Portuguese settlers. Petroleum was known to exist from the mid-19th century, but modern exploitation began in 1955. Production began in the Kwanza Basin in the 1950s, in the Congo Basin in the 1960s, and in the exclave of Cabinda in 1968. The Portuguese government granted operating rights for Block 0 to the Cabinda Gulf Oil Company, a subsidiary of Chevron Texaco. In 1955, oil production surpassed the exportation of coffee as Angola's largest export in 1973. A leftist military-led coup d'état started on April 25, 1974, in Lisbon, overthrew the Marcelo Caetano government in Portugal, and promised to hand over power to an independent Angolan government. Mobutu Sese Seko, the president of Zaire, met with Antonio de Spinola, the transitional president of Portugal, on September 15, 1974 on Sal Island in Cape Verde, crafting a plan to empower Holden Roberto of the National Liberation Front of Angola, Jonas Savimbi of UNITA, Daniel Chipenda of the MPLA's Eastern faction at the expense of MPLA leader Agostinho Neto while retaining the facade of national unity. Mobutu and Spinola wanted to present Chipenda as the MPLA head, Mobutu particularly preferring Chipenda over Neto because Chipenda supported autonomy for Cabinda. The Angolan exclave has immense petroleum reserves estimated at around 300 million tons which Zaire, and thus the Mobutu government, depended on for economic survival. After independence, thousands of white Portuguese left, most of them to Portugal and many traveling overland to South Africa. There was an immediate crisis because the indigenous African population lacked the skills and knowledge needed to run the country and maintain its well-developed infrastructure. The Angolan government created Sonangol, a state-run oil company, in 1976. 2 years later, Sonangol received the rights to oil exploration and production in all of Angola. After independence from Portugal in 1975, Angola was ravaged by a horrific civil war between 1975 and 2002. 1990s United Nations Angola Verification Mission 3 and MONUA spent $1.5 billion United States dollars overseeing implementation of the Lusaka Protocol, a 1994 peace accord that ultimately failed to end the civil war. The protocol prohibited UNITA from buying foreign arms, a provision the United Nations largely did not enforce. So both sides continued to build up their stockpile. UNITA purchased weapons in 1996 and 1997 from private sources in Albania and Bulgaria, and from Zaire, South Africa, Republic of the Congo, Zambia, Togo, and Burkina Faso. In October 1997, the UN imposed travel sanctions on UNITA leaders. But the UN waited until July 1998 to limit UNITA's exportation of diamonds and freeze UNITA bank accounts. While the U.S. government gave $250 million United States dollars to UNITA between 1986 to 1991, UNITA made $1.72 billion United States dollars between 1994 and 1999 exporting diamonds, primarily through Zaire to Europe. While no arms shipment to the government violated the protocol, no country informed the UN. Register on conventional weapons is required. Despite the increase in civil warfare in late 1998, the economy grew by an estimated 4% in 1999. The government introduced new currency denominations in 1999, including a 1 and 5 Kwanza note. 2000's an economic reform effort was launched in 1998. Angola ranked 160 out of 174 nations in the United Nations Human Development Index of 2000. In April 2000, Angola started an International Monetary Fund staff-monitored program. The program formally lapsed in June 2001, but the IMF remains engaged. In this context, the government of Angola has succeeded in unifying exchange rates and has raised fuel, electricity, and water rates. The Commercial Code, Telecommunications Law, and Foreign Investment Code are being modernized. A privatization effort, prepared with World Bank assistance, has begun with the BCI Bank. Nevertheless, a legacy of fiscal mismanagement and corruption persists. The civil war internally displaced 3.8 million people, 32% of the population, by 2001. The security brought about by the 2002 peace settlement has led to the resettlement of 4 million displaced persons, thus resulting in large-scale increases in agriculture production. Angola produced over 3 million carats of diamonds per year in 2003, and production was expected to grow to 10 million carats per year by 2007. In 2004, China's Exim Bank approved a $2 billion line of credit to Angola to rebuild infrastructure. The economy grew 18% in 2005, and growth was expected to reach 26% in 2006 and stay above 10% for the rest of the decade. The construction industry is another sector taking advantage of the growing economy, with various housing projects stimulated by the government that created various initiatives for this. Examples are the program Angola Investor and the projects Casa Feliz or MENA. However, not all public construction projects are functional. A case in point is Kilambaki, where a whole new satellite town of Luanda, consisting in the main of housing facilities for several hundreds of thousands of people, was completely inhibited for over 4 years because of the skyrocket prices, but it completely sold out after the government decreased the original price and created mortgage plans at around the election time, thus made it affordable for middle-class people. Chevron Texaco started pumping 50 kbbl/d from Block 14 in January 2000. But production has decreased to 57 kbbl/d in 2007 due to the poor quality of the oil. Angola joined the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries on January 1, 2007. Cabinda Gulf Oil Company found MALANG-1, an oil reservoir in Block 14, on August 9, 2007. Overview. Despite its abundant natural resources, output per capita is among the world's lowest. Subsistence agriculture provides the main livelihood for 85% of the population. Oil production and the supporting activities are vital to the economy, contributing about 45% to GDP and 90% of exports. Growth is almost entirely driven by rising oil production, which surpassed 1.4 million barrels per day in late 2005 and which is expected to grow to 2 million barrels per day by 2007. Control of the oil industry is consolidated in Sonangol Group, a conglomerate which is owned by the Angolan government, with revenues booming from oil exports. The government has started to implement ambitious development programs in building roads and other basic infrastructure for the nation. In the last decade of the colonial period, Angola was a major African food exporter but now imports almost all its food. Because of severe wartime conditions, including extensive planting of landmines throughout the countryside, agricultural activities have been brought to a near standstill. Some efforts to recover have gone forward, however, notably in fisheries. Coffee production, though a fraction of its pre-1975 level, is sufficient for domestic needs and some exports. In sharp contrast to a bleak picture of devastation and bare subsistence is expanding oil production, now almost half of GDP and 90% of exports. At 800,000 barrels per day, diamonds provided much of the revenue for Jonas Savimbi's UNITA rebellion through illicit trade. Other rich resources await development: gold, forest products, fisheries, iron ore, coffee, and fruits. This is a chart of trend of nominal gross domestic products of Angola at market prices using International Monetary Fund data. Figures are in millions of units. Foreign trade. Exports in 2004 reached $10,530,764,911. The vast majority of Angola's exports, 92% in 2004, are petroleum products. $785 million worth of diamonds, 7.5% of exports, were sold abroad that year. Nearly all of Angola's oil goes to the United States, 526 kbbl/d in 2006, making it the 8th largest supplier of oil to the United States, and to China, 477 kbbl/d in 2006. In the first quarter of 2008, Angola became the main exporter of oil to China. The rest of its petroleum exports go to Europe and Latin America. U.S. companies account for more than half the investment in Angola, with Chevron Texaco leading the way. The U.S. exports industrial goods and services, primarily oil field equipment, mining equipment, chemicals, aircraft, and food, to Angola, while principally importing petroleum. Trade between Angola and South Africa exceeded $300 million United States dollars in 2007. From the 2000s, many Chinese have settled and started up businesses.